All right, welcome to NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode is on the Los Angeles Chargers. I am joined by Eric from Triple Play Fantasy Podcast. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Thanks for having me on, Andy. Excited to talk some Chargers football today. Wish it was a little bit of a better circumstances, but they still got a chance for the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, let's get right into it. It's been it's been an up and down season. I mean, there a lot of expectations, I think, and but with this latest loss to the Texans, what happened?
Well, I think the theme that we've seen with the NFL this season is very unpredictable. We've seen some teams such as the Jags beating the Bills, the Texans beating the Titans after the Titans had an impressive string of wins. And so I think especially with the injuries and with COVID, this year has been something that we haven't seen really like any other. The Cardinals started out really well as the number one team in the NFL, and now they're 10-5. So I think you have to treat every game like it's any given Sunday. And unfortunately, the Texans just played the better game on both sides of the ball yesterday.
And I mean, just kind of we'll get into the Justin Herbert, but what did you see from Davis Mills? I mean, did he look pretty good, or was that just the Chargers defense just not doing as well?
So I think Davis Mills has been really slept on. I mean, is it fair to say that he's been the second best rookie QB behind Mac Jones? And
yeah.
And if need to say just not just this game, but look at the game where he faced the Patriots, and typically what Bill Belichick does against rookie QBs. I mean, he shut out Justin Herbert last year, and Davis Mills, I think, put up 21 points for over 250 yards. They don't really have any wide receivers that scary outside Brandon Cooks. I think he's really made Nico Hollins and Chris Conley into better receivers than what we thought that they would be. So I think that we've been sleeping on them a little bit, just because of kind of the dysfunction they've had, but it seems like they have a new direction in this franchise. And I definitely think Davis Mills deserves a chance to prove himself as a starter in 2022.
Absolutely. And, looking at obviously the Chargers quarterback, Justin Herbert, what have you seen from him this year? The team's obviously wins and losses. That's not been maybe where you want it to be, but he's still having a really good season, isn't he?
Yeah, and I love the arm strength on him. The throw he had a couple weeks ago, I think it was to Joshua Palmer, where he put it on the money, 60 yards as he's getting tackled. I mean, he looks confident in the pocket. He goes through his reads well. I'm a 49ers fan, so I know what it looks like when a quarterback is used to his scheme and knows how to find his first read, but he does a really good job spreading the ball around. We saw Mike Williams have a real resurgence the first part of this year. He uses his tight ends in the red zone, whether it be Jared Cook or Donald Parham when he is healthy. And this is his second year. I think a lot of us didn't think Justin Herbert would be as good as he was, myself included. And I mean, he looks like he could be the next big thing. And especially him and Mahomes in the same division for the next 10 years is exciting.
Yeah, and I like his personality as well. I don't know if you saw the press conference where he was asked if he lifted weights.
No, what did he say?
So yeah, his answer, he was asked if he lifts weights, and he said, yeah. Why doesn't it look like I do? And it was just kind of a funny exchange, and I like that when you have a personality from a quarterback.
Yeah, and there was videos coming out last year where after a win, he's leading the huddle, and he's really just trying to amp up his teammates. Going from a perennial Hall of Famer like Phillip Rivers to a transition like Justin Herbert. I mean, you don't have that down period of quarterbacks that a lot of franchises face.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, how he became the starter as well. I mean, they brought in, Tyrod Taylor and just, that mishap, with everything and team doctor there and him coming in and just really balling out.
Yeah, and kind of unexpected circumstances, but you saw what he could do in his first start, and albeit it was a loss, but it's like, wow, we can't go back to Tyrod Taylor after this guy. Like he's more ready than we thought. And, sometimes you don't really know how ready an NFL QB is until you put him in a game situation. They can look really good in practice and in training camp, but once they see opposing defenses, that's when I think you can get a gauge on how ready they are.
In looking at him, how good can he be? I mean, he's really kind of, set the bar high for him himself. How good can he be, especially being in the same division as Mahomes?
I mean, I think he can be a top 3 quarterback easily. In terms of fantasy right now, he's QB2 behind Josh Allen. We saw a little bit more rushing upside from him last year. I think he had like 8 rushing touchdowns and like 520 rushing yards. I think I think they're going to want to try to limit him as that because he's not a natural runner. That was actually more rushing than he did anything in college. But I mean, just talk about a great pocket passer. I think the awareness that he has, he's done a pretty good job avoiding sacks. It also helps when you have a pass catching running back like Austin Ekeler. I think the main thing they're going to have to do is continue to support him with weapons. The Keenan Allens, the Mike Williams, just make sure that he has targets to throw to, because that in an offensive line, especially a left tackle, are what you want to surround your franchise quarterback with.
Absolutely. And you talk about, some of those weapons, with the wide receivers, Keenan Allen, Williams, Guyton is kind of come on as well.
Yeah. Keenan Allen, I think, has been one of the most underrated wide receivers. For a while, he had the injury prone label. I know he tore his ACL early in his career. He had a lacerated kidney, which, that's just an unfortunate injury. You can't say that most NFL players have that, but he's been pretty durable the last couple of years. And, same with Mike Williams. I think that injury prone label was thrown out, but you realize the upside that this guy had. You see his highlights at Clemson. You remember that he was a top 10 pick. He can go up and get the ball. And that's especially with someone that can throw the ball like Justin Herbert, with guys that are 6'3" and 6'5", like Allen and Williams are respectively. That's sometimes what you want, is just a jump ball kind of guy. And with Guyton, I think that's a good complement. Third wide receiver, as I mentioned, you have Jared Cook, who you can throw to as a veteran, kind of that security blanket, and Austin Ekeler, probably the best, or if not one of the best, pass catching running backs. So, obviously they're not going to be able to sign all of these guys in years to come, but I think they have to draft, guys to take the place of anyone if they do leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Williams has kind of been he's been up and down, but he's had some really monster games. And do you see him coming back next year?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a prove it year. I mean, he started out the year really, really well. I'm pulling up his stats right now. 8 for 82, 7 for 91, 7 for 122. Hit a 1 versus 11 game for the Raiders, but then bouncing back with 8 for 165 and 2 touchdowns. I mean, the Chargers, they were leading the division to begin the year. And I know, COVID and the injuries have kind of hit every team at a different pace. It kind of seems like right as the Chargers were hitting their stride, then Ekeler missed a little bit of time with a hamstring. Now they have Mike Williams on the COVID list. So I think with a healthy team, we've seen, it's basically them or the Chiefs. And not saying that the Chiefs have hit their peak, but they're starting to face, kind of the long-term contract implications of Mahomes' contract. Travis Kelce, we've seen, isn't the surefire tight end that he once was. They have a little bit of an aging defense with Tyrann Mathieu and Chris Jones, although they've been a little bit resurgent the past 7 games. But you look at the Chargers and they have youth on their side. So I think you got to keep the core that you have now moving forward.
Yeah, and speaking of that core, Austin Ekeler has been, solid. You talked about out of the back, pass catching, and just he's been a solid back all around. His health has, been up and down. Can he be that bell cow back, or can they keep the rest of the stable of running backs together to kind of help maybe spell him when he needs to be out?
Yeah, so I definitely don't think he's going to be your traditional run through the tackles running back. In the games they've played this year, the most carries he has is 17. And for the year, he has a 4.6 yards per carry average. He only has over 100 rushing yards in one game. But I think one of the things that makes Austin Ekeler special is just how good of a receiver that he is. And not just, okay, we'll have him do an angle route out at the backfield, or, we'll do a halfback screen with him. We had him on our podcast. And, one of the things is he's very efficient running the wheel route. And, doing a down and in or dig route or get, having a sense of where the first down is so that, he can get some yardage or picking up good bits of chunk plays. I don't think he's the most efficient red zone back. I mean, we saw Justin Jackson have a great game yesterday. So I don't think he can be, the quote unquote Jonathan Taylor type where, he's pounding the ball 20 to 25 times a game, but 15 to 20 touches through the air and through the ground, I think is how you're going to maximize his usage. And his contract is fairly reasonable. 4-year, $23 million extension for someone of his caliber, I think is a steal.
Well, yeah, he almost came out of nowhere. Well, it did kind of come out of nowhere too a few years ago.
Yeah. And the whole thing with the Melvin Gordon holdout, it's just like, okay, well, he's in an offense where running backs excel. Melvin Gordon led the league in touchdowns, but he didn't have efficient yards per carry. Philip Rivers dumps to the running backs. It was kind of like the mix of perfect storm. And there was a lot of people that I do fantasy with that were saying, hey, his value is gone as soon as Melvin Gordon comes back. And I was a believer, and I bought low because I said, like, look, you don't just have these beautiful games like he does, 3-4 touchdowns, and you go back to the bench. It takes a special running back in the league to be able to show that upside that he does. So the fact that they're going to have him the next 3 years at a value, once again, the shelf life for running backs isn't very long. So you just got to maximize the efficiency while you have it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you talk about just his value, in fantasy protection. PPR is huge for him as well. I mean, if he's going to be that, catching passes, I mean that's huge.
Yeah, and he plays fantasy himself. One of the things I
Mhm.
really like about him is, he was on an interview with Liz Losa from Yahoo, and he
Yeah,
says, "Yeah, I tested positive for COVID again. Go pick up Justin Jackson." And it's I think I speak for the fantasy community. There's some bad apples that are going to tweet at people when they have
oh,
bad games,
right.
and it's their profession. I don't think people running backs enjoy having bad games, or any football player in general. But I think it lessens the blow when you realize that Austin Ekeler is in touch with the community. That he does giveaways for people that have started him, and that's really how I think you bridge between the casual fan and the players. And I think he does a great job at that.
That is huge. That is absolutely huge. Yeah, I mean, you talk about just kind of connecting, with, uh, players, and that's, you had that interview with him. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, some of the highs and lows. He was able to just. I mean, this is the fact that he was willing to kind of come on says a lot about him.
Yeah, I mean, we talked with him, and he said he's done 20, last offseason, he did about 20 to 30 interviews. And the fact that, it's not like he's a no-name guy. And, we've had countless people on our podcast, mostly retired athletes,
Yeah,
Clinton Portis, Santana Moss, OJ Anderson, people that have a little bit more time. And I'm sure for how much he trains during the season, and he's a big gym rat as well. He doesn't really go out and drink or party, that he chose to, take some time and to do that with us. He ended up following us on Twitter afterwards, which was pretty cool.
that's cool.
He runs the foundation as well, and he just seems like a really grounded guy that just wants to be good at football. And so some of the highs of that, just figuring out what goes through the training that he goes through, finding out his journey. He wasn't a highly touted draft pick. He's relatively small. He's very bulky, but that he just kept trying to prove himself. That doing things like going with the wide receivers in the meeting room so that he could learn some of their routes. And I think that's kind of what you have to do to be successful is that you have to be flexible and willing to adapt. And just a guy that you couldn't root for more, and just a big Eckler fan.
Absolutely, me as well. I have them on all my teams. That's and my dynasty team, all that. So, and something that really helps him as well is that offensive line. I mean, and we have Rashawn Slater coming in. Talk about that offensive line and kind of what that's meant to the running game as well.
Yeah, well, I think the Chargers, they stuck by Philip Rivers so long, and
Mhm.
reasonably so. He's the franchise leader in every passing category, and should be a Hall of Famer. And I know that's another discussion for another day. But one of
Mhm.
the things that always plagued him was the lack of mobility, and him being a statue. And if you don't have a good offensive line, that especially if you don't have a mobile quarterback, that you're not going to have as much time to throw the ball. So I think there was kind of that shift in the balance, and you see them by taking Rashawn Slater, is that they want to protect Justin Herbert. And, they say football starts at the lines, and it's true. You could have a great passing offense. We saw years ago with the Colts and with Andrew Luck, they had T.Y. Hilton. They spent a first round on Philip Dorsett, but they didn't have enough of an offensive line for Andrew Luck to throw the ball. He was the most sacked quarterback. We're seeing it now with Russell Wilson, where he's the most hit quarterback since he's come in the league, and those add up.
Mhm.
And, eventually the QB might get distressed, and someone like Russell might request a trade, talking about a top 5, top 10 quarterback in the league now. And so
Mhm.
I think it's really important that you have to protect the franchise guy. And I respect the Chargers for really saying, hey, look, like, maybe we didn't know this last year, but Herbert is our guy, and we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that we have him as long as possible, and he's as healthy as can be.
Right. In that, I mean, obviously in the draft, it's not a sexy pick to do offensive line, but that is one of the most important. Those are the most important parts of the team, other than the quarterback, because if you don't have that for even pass protection or running, you're just not going to have an offense.
Yeah, and I mean, teams are willing to give a premium. I'm a
Mhm.
49ers fan, and we gave up a third and fifth for Trent Williams, and we made him the highest paid left tackle, but he has the highest, pass blocking efficiency according to PFF, and he's really kept Jimmy G upright for someone that's been pretty injury prone himself. And eventually, when they transition to Trey Lance, you want to protect the quarterback, especially the blind side. So I can't agree with you more, Andy, that it's an underrated piece of football, but I'm sure if you talk to any coach, it's so important.
Absolutely. Well, kind of, something also important on the other side of the ball. The Chargers have just been, brutal as far as their run defense. Rex Burkhead, has a 2 touchdown game. What have you seen defensively from them that just hasn't been working on their run defense?
So I think they rely way too much on Joey Bosa, and obviously he was out yesterday. They had three QB pressures for a rookie QB in Davis Mills, and I think that was one of their. I think the Chargers for a while built around their defense. When they had the Casey Haywards, the Jason Verretts, they had a relatively good pass rusher. When they had Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa made an impact right away. But I think, like we've said, they've kind of transitioned to more of an offensive team now.
Yeah.
Where they're protecting the quarterback, or they're getting weapons like Mike Williams, and there's just not that pass rush on the quarterback. I mean, Rex Burkhead to have 130 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, you know, as we've seen with the 49ers and another Bosa, one edge rusher or one interior lineman like Aaron Donald can cover up a lot.
Hmm.
And when that person is out, if you can't have a consistent pass rush, you're going to give the quarterback all day to throw. You're going to open up play action. You're not going to be able to shut down the running lanes. So I think that's a priority for them this offseason is they have to get more help on the D line. You can't assume that somebody's going to play a full 16, 17, 18 games now. And that, like I said earlier, the football starts at the lines, and defensive line is very, very important. And Joey Bosa needs some help.
Yeah, I mean, they have like Joseph. I mean, they've
Kind
really
of on
kind
the
of
downside of his career though at this point.
right,
He's still
right.
he's still good, but I
I mean, it's
wouldn't
a
say
name, right, right.
yeah.
But yeah, when you look at it, I mean, Derwin James has been good. Or I mean, there's some other players that you see that need to step up or who've done well this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is health, and someone
Yeah.
like Derwin James has been really healthy for the most part. It's tough because you're facing the Chiefs a couple times a year, and
Hmm.
they gave up 34. I think what we've seen is there's so many moving pieces for all teams. Whether it be offensive line combinations, defensive line combinations. I'm not going to say that I throw this year out of the NFL, but I mean every team has been impacted by injuries or COVID at a record rate. It's like you can't really get the same, you know, unit out there, whether
Hmm.
it's offensive line, defense, communication. What we saw last week with the Bears when they played the Vikings, their entire secondary was out.
Yep.
And I think the entire Vikings secondary was out. So it's like you're talking about people that are just stepping on the field for the first time that, not only are you worried about their skills or their lack of game experience, but communication with one another,
Hmm.
knowing the plays, having someone call it out at the line of scrimmage, having that defensive captain. So I want to see in kind of a more quote unquote traditional year how the Chargers look on defense before kind of assessing their needs.
Yeah, that is a good point. I mean, as a Bears fan, Bears had, just secondary issues as well, but they had someone that, came in and stepped in and did well and hopefully, played his way into the starting lineup and could maybe be an impact player. But it really it, as a fan and a fantasy player, we don't know the full impact of. I think that was a great point that you brought up of the communication, because you can't just throw a player in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that a lot of moving pieces that we don't see on this side of things.
Yeah, and they have good names. Chris Harris, I still think is an above average corner. Joey Bosa when he's healthy. Linval Joseph. I think Jerry Tillery has some upside to him.
Mhm.
Kaiser White and Kenneth Murray. Like I think they have good names on there. Once again, it's when somebody steps out, it's like, oh, who's gonna be the next guy? And as we saw with the Rams a couple weeks ago when they played on Monday night, Tyler Higbee and Odell Beckham 3 hours before the game were announced inactive because they had COVID. And so sometimes it's literally, right before tip off or, as you're getting ready where it's like, oh, so-and-so's out, next man up. And that's really been the mentality this year in football is next man up. And at a certain point, it's like, how many next man up can we have before injuries are a main reason of the performance? And I think that's certainly a reason yesterday. I mean, that Chargers D to give up -5 in fantasy and to give up as many points as they did to the Texans, that's just something I don't think you see with a healthy defense.
Yeah, I mean, when you have all those injuries, I mean, it's tough. But what it can come down to as well is coaching, kind of bringing things together, and looking at Brandon Staley, is he the guy for the Chargers?
So I do like Brandon Staley, but I think he has to get a little less aggressive.
Mm.
And against the Chiefs, they had a lot of fourth down opportunities where I think early in the game you take the points. And I understand like, oh, you're facing Patrick Mahomes on the other side, you want to put the pressure on. But I think at a certain point, you take points on the board. And maybe you get a little bit more aggressive for it later in the game. But especially if you trust your kicker, and once again, we've seen teams recycle through kickers, you take it early on the board. And I think you have faith in your offense. You've seen Justin Herbert can get you downfield. I mean, yesterday they scored 29 points. I know, albeit a loss. The week before the Chiefs, 28 against the Giants, 37 against the Bengals, 41. The Broncos, they kind of had a bad game, 13. The Steelers, they scored 41 against the Vikings. They scored 20. This team can hang 20 easily, 30 most
Mhm.
likely.
Mhm.
And so that really comes down to, do you trust your quarterback in a 2-minute drill or when you need points to get you down the field? And I think you can. So maybe you're a little bit more aggressive later in the games or when it's a closer game. But when it's 0-0, 3-0, 10-7, I think you just take the points. You don't have to go for it on, anything more than a 4th and 3. Show that put the pressure on the other side a little bit. Patrick Mahomes has been very up and down this year. I
Mhm.
think he's 2nd or 3rd in the league in interceptions. So that's my thing about Brandon Staley is I think he's a good coach. I think he provides a lot of youth and energy, and I like that he isn't second guessing himself just like Harbaugh is doing, because
Mhm.
then I think that's when you really come under fire. But I think he just needs to pump the gas a little bit because I think he's coaching out of fear when he does that rather than out of confidence.
That's an interesting point, and I don't know statistically, but it feels like this year, the NFL, coaches have been just more aggressive, in general than previous years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
and I think it's just the offense. It's turned into an offensive league. It's a passing league. You know, um, there's rules to protect the quarterback. It seems like, that's just kind of the way that it's transitioning. It's being more of a passing league now, and I think you're seeing teams that are being aggressive and going for it. I think you go back to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago and Philly going for it on 4th down and running the Philly special. It's like, that's what's going to win you games. That's what's going to keep your head coaching job is going for it on plays like that rather than being, passive and saying, oh, we'll kick the field goal, we'll punt.
Well, yeah, and a lot of it comes down to kind of what you said, trusting your quarterback. You trust Justin Herbert. You look at the Christmas Day game. The Packers went for it, I believe, on their own end. 4th and whatever. They have Aaron Rodgers. You trust Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. And I mean, you trust Justin Herbert and you trust the weapons around him. And so that's the thing. Like I said, I think he's a good coach, but I think that this is also the norm of the NFL now. But I'm sure you watched the Thursday night game. The 49ers went for it on 4th and 6 at about the 40. Like, why not either, you know, maybe you run a play, you try to get them off sides and you run a 4th and 1, or you punt them, you pin them back deep in the end zone. And at that point, they had scored 0 points. I think you can trust your offense, but also sometimes make the smart play.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the question sometimes. Do some of these coaches, almost try to get too cute or whatever? Like you talked about, Harbaugh, with the Ravens against the Packers, going for that, and that was probably a good move, but they only had the one play, and you hear that on a radio that it was, okay, they only had basically it was a rollout to the one side, to everyone knew it was going to go to Mark Andrews, so everyone knew that. So taking you know being aggressive is one thing, but being smart about it is another. And overall, um, do you trust Brandon Staley kind of as a head coach to make those right decisions when the chips are down?
Yeah, well, even talking about the Ravens a couple weeks ago, when they played the Steelers and they went for it on the fourth down, also, that was a good play call. It was just a
Mhm.
little bit of a bad throw by Lamar, a little bit of the outstretched arms of Andrews. But if he scores that touchdown, that's a completely different narrative. At the time they win the game, we're talking about how it's a great call. And I think a lot of times we go by the results rather than the play call itself. So I think Brandon Staley is very innovative. I think we're transitioning to kind of a young coaching regime in the NFL. That everybody's
Mhm.
looking for the next Sean McVay, the Kyle Shanahans, the Cliff Kingsburys, and Brandon Staley's a young guy himself. And kind of what we're seeing with a lot of motion, a lot of jet sweep, especially when you're building your offense or you're building your team around an offense. And I think that's what the Chargers are now, more of an offensive identity. And look, there's going to be bumps and bruises. I mean, he's in his second year, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, what I like about Brandon Staley, and what I've heard is that, like in press conferences, he's able to kind of break down offensive plays and stuff, which is in contrast to the Bears head coach Nagy. What he was supposed to be that kind of offensive guy from Kansas City, but in press conferences he just doesn't provide that. And you have like uh, obviously Brandon Staley or some of these other coaches that are able to just kind of on the fly break things down and not say, well, I have to go to the tape. I mean, that's kind of what you want to see. You want to see a coach who's able to just kind of react, you know, when he needs to.
Yeah, and one of the things that we didn't even talk about, you want a players coach, and I know that's thrown
Ah,
out there, but
hmm
you see people like Matt Nagy that aren't really responding to the media. As much as I love Kyle Shanahan, he throws his players under the bus a lot, and there's been friction in there. I
hmm
mean, and it doesn't even have to be based on record. I mean, you look at what the Lions do and how hard they play for Dan Campbell,
hmm
and it's like, yeah, they don't have the talent; they're a rebuilding team, but that's somewhere in the future where it's like they have a good foundation. People are going to want to play for this guy. Same for Mike Tomlin. People want to play for him. And I've never heard, and maybe because you follow the Chargers a little bit more, I've never heard him throw Justin Herbert under the bus. I've never heard him throw the defense. He'll take a lot of responsibility for bad play calling or saying we weren't prepared, but he doesn't put it on the players. He's willing to accept it as himself as a coach first, and I think that's really important because win or lose, you want the players to have your back.
Yeah, I mean, and the previous coach Anthony Lynn, he was one that I did root for, but it seemed like he
That play
kind of
calling,
yeah.
they lost too many close games. His play
hmm
calling was very suspect, and game management as well.
and that's huge. You look at the coaches that are kind of in question, across the league. I mean, the Vikings coach, Bears coach, the game management is huge.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like just use of timeouts. Whether you're going to go for it in 2 minutes, or you're going to be more conservative, or you're going to be aggressive. And I mean, this is his second year, so I'm not going to hold him to the same standards as coaches that have been in the league longer. But he hasn't been as like we're talking about the same division. Vic Fangio has been awful with his use of timeouts this year, and this is
hmm
somebody that has been in the game for a while, mostly as a defensive coordinator. And you're kind of seeing his first head coaching experience where it looks like it's a little bit overwhelming for him. And they stuck with Teddy Bridgewater, thinking that he was the answer because he limits turnovers, but he doesn't provide that upside of an offense. But it's like, I'm stubborn in my ways. I'm going to stick with him, and we're talking about a guy that's been in the year or in the NFL 30 plus years and getting his first head coaching experience, and Brandon Staley, who's in his 30s, getting his first head coaching experience. So, you just look at the upside and you say, look, there is room to grow. He's not a perfect coach, but do I feel good about him being the coach for the next, 2, 3 years? Yeah. And if we don't have success, then maybe we reevaluate.
Absolutely. And talking about success, and what do you see as a prognosis and prediction for the rest of the season for the Chargers here?
So right now, I think they have to win their last two games. They're 8 and
Mhm.
7. They're second in the AFC West, and with the addition of having another wild card team where 7 make it, there's only a couple that are eliminated right now. They've had some really good wins. Winning 41-22 at the Bengals. Beating the Steelers 41-37. Winning at Philly. Winning at the Chiefs earlier this year. Week 1, I thought was a really good win against Washington football team. I think you need a wake up call after that 41-29 net loss. Now, I know Justin Herbert threw a late pick 6, and that's part of the reason why they gave up so much. But you're playing the Broncos and you're playing the Raiders, two people that you're fighting in playoff spots with. You can almost control your destiny. 10 and 7 should get you a wild card spot in the playoffs. I think if you can get in, as we've said, it's any given Sunday, and the Chiefs look like they're going to be the 1 seed. So I could see them beating any other team. I could see them beating the Bills. I can see them beating the Patriots. I can see them beating the Ravens or the Bengals, which they've already beat this year. I could see them beating a depleted Tennessee team. I could see them beating Indianapolis, and we've already seen them beat Tennessee. So I think first things first, you got to finish out the last 2 games. They're playing, and take it 1 week at a time. You're playing Denver at home, and then you're playing at Oakland, who has been depleted this year as well. Derek Carr got hurt. So I think you got to finish out strong. I think there's no excuse of why you should not make the playoffs this year.
Oh, I didn't see that. Is Carr out now?
I don't know if he's out, but he got hurt yesterday.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and, and Mariota's on the COVID list, so you don't know if he's going to be cleared to return for next game. You also don't know his vaccination status. So, whether if he tests negative or whether he has to go through the 10 days that Cole Beasley is, where he's in jeopardy of missing another game.
Yeah, when you kind of look at it, with that stat, with the COVID stuff, is Ekeler kind of on track to play this upcoming week?
Well, we thought that he was going to play this week, and he just tested positive again prior to the team flying out, and he said, like, look, I'm out this week. So that's why I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis. For
Right.
some people, after the 10 days of being quarantined, the symptoms go away, and for other people, it lasts a little bit longer. It's kind of one of the weird things with this new virus and variation of the Omicron we're seeing is just, it's more transmissible, but it's less contagious. But you still have to pass the test regardless.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting thing, with how that's affected this year. Even last year, I think people were a little bit more, I don't know, reserved with things, and now it's kind of just like, just really kind of exploded the last a couple weeks here, and yeah. So really, when you look at it, the Chargers, it's right out in front of them, right, to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And if they were to win those 2 games, I mean, is there a team that, other than the Chiefs that would, frighten you the most? I mean, matchup wise. I mean, if you look at the Titans, they're depleted, but if they have Henry coming back, that would be a tough matchup,
So,
with, yeah.
so the 2 teams that I'd be scared about them playing the most are the Bills, because I think the Bills have a very good offense, and I think they're starting to click. And as we saw yesterday, I think they're being aggressive for it.
Right.
And, going forward on 4th down multiple times. I mean, Josh Allen isn't in the MVP conversation, but he's played like it. Once again, I know we kind of dabble in fantasy a little bit, but he's the number 1 fantasy QB. He's someone, we talked about having difficulty stopping the run. He's a QB with rushing upside. So the Bills scare me, and also the Colts. The Colts have been
Mm-hmm.
clicking very well. Jonathan
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, he didn't score last week for the first time in 11 games, but he's averaging 5.6 yards per carry on the year. He's the leader in broken tackles and runs of 20 plus yards. Carson Wentz looks very efficient. I'm not going to say he's an MVP candidate, but he's been managing it very well. And the Colts have a very good offensive line. So if you can't get pressure on Carson Wentz and you let the Colts play their style of game, I mean, we saw them beat the Chargers. We saw them beat the Patriots, ending their winning streak. We saw them go into Buffalo and win 41-15. Remember, this team started out the year 0-4.
Mm-hmm.
So they have been one of the hotter teams in the last couple months of football. But, I think if you get into the playoffs, I think anything can happen. I can't think of any team in the AFC where if they get in, I'd say, okay, they're an easy out.
Yeah, this season, it's really been one of the more unpredictable ones. I mean, Chiefs were down. Everyone thought they were kind of out, and then they have this long win streak. The Colts did turn around, and I think against the 49ers, that your 49ers, that wasn't a game that kind of helped them, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because we were, the favorite in that game, and they came in and they played their style of offense, and we have a very good D line, and they neutralized us. And just to kind of show you how crazy the NFL has been, I'm going to pull up the Titans' schedule.
Yeah.
So they had a loss to the Jets, 27-24. Then they have a winning streak where they went at Jacksonville, versus Buffalo, versus Kansas City, 27-3. At the Colts, they win 34-31. At the Rams, they win 28-16. Versus the Saints, 23-21. And then they lose to the Texans, 22-13. So you're beating 5 playoff teams and then losing to one of the worst teams in the league. So that's what I mean. It's one game. It's not like, MLB or NBA where it's a best of 5 or a best of 7, depending on what round. You literally play one game, and anything can happen in that one game.
Well, especially, this late in the season, and with, adding an extra game, health, anything can happen with health. But, and looking at matchups, I mean, if this time of year, if you have a good running game and you have a quarterback you can trust, I mean, that's huge, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the staple of football. Like, kill the, and this is what the 49ers do is, you try to get an early lead, take possession, kill the clock. Good running game, especially as it gets colder and teams are playing, in the snow. It's like you want to have your not put the ball in your QB's hands. What we saw with the Patriots a couple weeks ago, they had Mac Jones throw the ball 3 times and they said, "Hey, we're going to run, try and stop us." And they ended up beating the Bills in Buffalo.
Yeah, and you look at, obviously, Belichick has kind of, proved that he is, one of, if not the greatest coaches ever, because he's able to just take the strengths and take the circumstances and make almost the perfect game plan. I don't know what other coach can do that, but what it takes is, the coach and the quarterback proving it. And you look at it, you know, with Mahomes, he was a quarterback that, obviously they weren't doing well, but everyone, with Andy Reid, everyone thought, well, they're going to turn around. They kept giving him benefit of the doubt because they've done it before, So once the Chargers, if they go ahead and do something special this year, then they will kind of earn that.
Yeah, and I think everybody thinks that the Chargers are a team to be feared. Like I'm live in Baltimore, and coming from the East Coast, I remember when they played at Baltimore this year, everybody thought they're like, we might lose to this team, and they ended up blowing at the Chargers out that game. But I don't think anybody looks at Los Angeles on the schedule and thinks that's an easy win. Yeah, I think you come to play prepared every week to face them, and I mean Justin Herbert is probably one of the top exciting young QBs in the league, and sometimes he can single-handedly win you a game. So I think you never rule that out.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. I definitely appreciate your time. So where can everyone find you again?
Yeah, so I run the Triple Play Fantasy account at Trip Play Fantasy on Twitter, at Trip Play Fantasy on Instagram. Check us out on the socials. We also put a lot of content on our YouTube channel. As podcast has been kind of transitioning away, we're doing a lot of shorter videos, help for fantasy advice, and not just football. The Triple Play refers to the fact that we do 3 sports. So we talk some baseball, we talk some some basketball as well, all fantasy related. We also do athlete interviews. So, coming from speaking to a Los Angeles fan base, we've had the pleasure of interviewing Oral Hershiser from the Dodgers,
Okay.
Ty Buttrey, who used to play for the Angels as well. So, if you're looking for some good content, if you're looking to get into these fantasy side of sports, definitely give us a check out. Send us a message. We're always happy to help out and do whatever we can to help you win your leagues.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And once again, this has been NFL Outdated Coverage Series on the Los Angeles Chargers. Thanks again, Eric.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate you having me on.